Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, referring to the apostasy. The crest that you see is a logo for the Fabian Society that was founded in 1884 in London. Here's some other examples of their logo. In this one you can more clearly than the others see that their staff flies the FS, Fabian Society flag, which happens to be red, and there's pictured a wolf in sheep's clothing. The late 1800s was an interesting time for the advent of socialism. There's a number of different organizations worldwide that a body could look at to see how socialism developed. Not that it was entirely terrible. There was a lot of people in Great Britain with the Industrial Revolution that were perhaps oppressed or not treated that well by the bourgeoisie, the folks in control. But I'm going back to the early 1800s, and this is a little bit of a biography on Karl Marx. He was born in Prussia, 1818, and he was part of the young Hegelians, and it was in 1848 that he published the Communist Manifesto with Frederick Engels. A lot of you probably learned that in history, and how does this tie in with the apostasy that we see in the Christian Protestant churches today? Here is here we are. A little bit of history on Karl Marx. He was born into a Jewish middle-class family. He studied law and philosophy, and because he became stateless, he lived in exile in London for a long time, and he kind of lived off Frederick Engels quite a bit. He also wrote Das Kapital. And initially, I think that the socialist idea was that they would work for the rights of the working class people. Karl Marx also was beginning in the mid-1830s, when he was in Paris, he was with an organization called League of Outlaws that was formed in 1834, and out of that came a Christian communist revolutionary organization in 1836 called League of Justice. Some people may also know it as the League of Just, and I believe that that's tied to the Chartists in Britain in 1845. Also, from a book that I've read in researching this topic. Let's see if we can, if you can see this well. It's called A Christian Manifesto by Francis Schaeffer, and it talks about the Communist Manifesto as well as the Humanist Manifesto of 1933, and also the second edition in 1973. I don't know that Karl Marx spent much time, if any, in the United States, but his writings, of course, came here. And after the Civil War, the socialist movement that gained a lot of traction because of all of the people who were displaced and what have you through the war. Also, going back to the mid-1800s, not that I really believe that necessarily that Karl Marx was involved with this. In 1846, there was founded the Evangelical Alliance. I may be able to link to that article. Let's see. Yes, the doctrinal basis of the Evangelical Alliance. You can see that I've accessed this from Bible Hub, and here in the first paragraph you'll see that the 9 articles were adopted by the first meeting of the Evangelical Alliance in London in 1846. And mind you, the Fabian Society was 1884, and they published in their report the proceedings of the conference held at the Freemasons' Hall in London, August 19th to September 2nd, 1846. So this is one of the earliest evangelical Protestant creeds and alliances that was put together. And I find it interesting that Karl Marx was in London around that time, and that also the Communist Manifesto came out in 1848. And I'd like to show you if I can find one right quick. I should be able to. Yeah, here we are. Here's some pictures of the Freemason halls. Some different shots. An interior, obviously painting from that time period. This appears more current. Some of the architecture and the decor I find quite interesting. So there you have some idea of the place that your first evangelical alliance was formed at Freemasons Hall in 1846. In the late 1800s, mind you, the Fabian Society came about around 1884. here's an interesting Karl Marx article from Juicy Ecumenism. That's a website that would be interesting for folks to check out. They write some interesting articles. And there's a statue of Karl Marx and all the people taking pictures. Check out his red cape. It had been good for that man if he had not been born. It was his 200th birthday on May 5th of this year, May Day. It's Karl Marx's birthday. How you like that? And it's a Chinese statue. It attracts Chinese tourists when they're in Germany. But even Chinese communist tyrants no longer truly believe in Marx's economics, whose devotees are mostly confined to North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela. Mostly it's unclear how many people Marxism killed during the last century. Some people call it Marxism, some call it communism, but the socialist Democrats, it's unclear how many people Marxism killed during the last century in the Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, China, North Korea, Indochina, Cuba, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Angola, Mozambique, and elsewhere. There were those directly shot by state agents, those tortured to death or dying in prison, and there's some estimates say that more than 100 million, and I've seen that number as much as 150 million in different things that I read. So our estimate says 32 million Christians were killed by communism in the last century out of a total of 45 million Christians killed during that time, or 70 million over 2,000 years. So about all the modern Christians since the time of Christ were killed by communism. Yet they're seldom recalled, especially in the West. Also not recalled are how many Western church elites and thinkers were themselves bewitched by the allure of Marxism. It began from the start after the Bolshevik Revolution, which was 1917, when even as thousands of priests and bishops were being killed by the Red Terror. Methodist and other mainline Protestant prelates and activists hailed Bolshevism for its overthrow of medieval monarchy and religiosity in favor of liberation and modernity. They saw the Soviet Union as an egalitarian social gospel fully realized. These Christian fans of Marxism later cooled on Stalinism, but their enthusiasms were reanimated by Mao. So you can see right here, the world and national councils of churches funded and lobbied for armed Marxist movements in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And Castro in Cuba and the Sandinistas in Nicaragua were special favorites. And I have a number of different articles from different Christian organizations that rather back this up. Some of you may be familiar with the Christian Observer. And that's another good one that, let's see, there's Deception Free. That's also a very good one. This one's titled The Conspiracy, and it's actually several pages long, but I do have the article here that you might want to look over. Some of the things that I've highlighted. Well, the article is written with the perspective that there is a worldwide conspiracy taking place to bring about global government and also in one world religion. The people organizing this are the elite of the world who follow occultist satanic practices. This includes people from the most powerful groups in the world, such as international bankers, the Vatican, the royal family, major politicians, and businessmen, to name a few. In referring to this, I'm going to use the term NWO. This is the order of the Antichrist and his movement that seeks to establish his rule on earth. If you do not hold this view, you'll find it hard to accept some of the things presented in the article. If you wish to become educated about the NWO and their agenda, you'll need to take some considerable time doing research and learning about it. And goes on to say the NWOs occupied and influenced every mountain of society, economics and politics, religion and entertainment, and we seem to think as Christians that they left us out. How they control these spheres of influence is by occupying high positions within the structure in order to influence from the top down. That's why their symbol is the triangle or the pyramid, because they're at the top and you're further down. Not everyone is conscious of what they're doing. In fact, there's only a very few near the top who actually know what they're doing. And he cites 2 Timothy 3:13. And again, this article is quite long. Some of the practical facts that he wanted to point out, which is this next section here. It is the plan of the NWO to not only set up a one world government and economy, but also a one world religion. Zbigniew Brzezinski, former National Security Advisor and Trilateral Commission insider, advised his superiors that the New World Order can be established only by employing religion as a key weapon of global influence. There's a great deal of facts that we can bring forth to prove that this conspiracy is taking place also within the church, but let's look at a couple of sources that will prove that it has and is working within the church. Dr. Carol Quigley, in his book Tragedy and Hope in 1974, outlines the entire conspiracy and how it operates. And I do realize that there are probably folks who've covered this in the past, and maybe there have been writings about it, but in searching things out, I didn't find really a tremendous amount of articles to work with, but the handful that I did seem to have their agenda pretty much on target. I actually snooped around on YouTube for other videos that might point to this, and I only found a couple or three, and they used the voice modification to make themselves not known. I'm not sure, why they would do that. I guess if you're going up against the NWO and the Rockefellers and the occultists and Satanists, then perhaps you might want to hide out. But Tragedy and Hope outlines the conspiracy and how it operates. The crazy thing is that he agrees with it and was allowed to research what the NWO is doing, and so they let him do that. Further down in the article, and again, this is deceptionfree.wordpress.com, and just search it under that for National Council of Churches. And down here at the bottom, we've got Myron Fagan, a famous Jewish American playwright, Broadway and Hollywood, who became a Christian, published a series of audio tapes released in '67 entitled The Illuminati. On the tapes, Fagan outlines 4 aspects of the conspiracy takeover of America. This claim concurs with Quigley's book, Dr. Carol Quigley. According to Myron Fagan, at the end of the 19th century, Grand Orient Freemasonry deliberately sent Jacob Schiff, and I wonder if he might be like a grandfather or great-grandfather of Adam Schiff. That's a name we know from American politics today. And according to Myron Fagan, at the end of the 19th century, Grand Orient Freemasonry deliberately sent Jacob Schiff, son of a Jewish Reform rabbi born in Frankfurt, Germany, to the United States to carry out 4 specific assignments. The first was to acquire control of America's money system, and that was taken care of in the teens. I believe Woodrow Wilson was involved in that. The first was to acquire control of America's money system. This was accomplished by founding the Federal Reserve System. And the second was to find desirable men for a price who would willingly serve as stooges for the Great Conspiracy. Once they were found, they would be promoted to federal positions in Congress, on the U.S. Supreme Court, and at all federal agencies. The agency founded for grooming these men is the Council on Foreign Relations. The third was to create minority group strife throughout the nation, particularly between races. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was founded for that purpose. So a four-prong assault was to get a hold of the money system, put stooges in at federal positions, and promote them to the Council on Foreign Relations. And the third was to create minority group strife between the races, and then the fourth was to create a movement to destroy religion in the United States with Christianity as the chief target. And this became the task of the National Council of Churches, and that was recorded by Myron Fagan in 1967. And the National Council on Churches is really the biggest crux of what I'm doing here. I want to show how socialism in the early 1800s, bolstered by the Communist Manifesto of 1848, the advent of the Evangelical Alliance in 1846, then not long after that you've got the Civil War, which created an open window for socialist and doctrine to come in. In fact, Karl Marx's first organization was the International Working Men's Association, the IWA, and that became, I believe, the Socialist International. And there's all sorts of ties to different things. There's, let's see, Henry Bergson was from France. That's a name to mention. H.G. Wells and George Bernard Shaw. Also, the Milner-Fabian League of Nations. Even Ignatius of Loyola is a name. The Theosophical Society that was, forget her first name, Blavatsky, and she's a known Satanist, and it's rather unbelievable the total number of different organizations that were out there during the years, like your Home Missions Council of North America and the National Council of Churches. Its original name it was actually formed in 1908. It was James Armstrong, who was a Methodist bishop in New York. I wonder if he's any relation to the Herbert W. Armstrong of the Grace Communion International Church. And anyway, the Methodist Bishop James Armstrong founded the Methodist Society, I believe it was called, in New York City. And in 1908, a year or so later, that became the Federal Council of Churches. So the Federal Council of Churches operated from 1908 until 1950, I do believe, is when the National Council of Churches became their new name. Other organizations, there's the National Protestant Council, the International Council of Religious Education, the United Council of Church Women, which became Church Women United, and today we know that as the National Urban Coalition, also the United Stewardship Council. So all of these seemingly benevolent organizations with a socialist agenda, and the Illuminati, the likelihood the Jesuits, all these different organizations, they had a conspiracy. And you can read in Psalms chapter 2, the kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. And then in Psalm 83, for they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate against thee. So you can see that conspiracy is something that's biblical. In fact, it's mentioned in the King James Version of the Bible in excess of 30 times, conspiracy, conspiratorial, the different forms of that word. So people pick on the conspiracy minded, but it's actually biblical to be aware of the things that go on in the world. All right. Continuing in this article, let's see. I don't believe that I highlighted everything. There it is, the Methodist Foundation of Social Service. I'd like to move on to the Christian Observer article. I do believe is the one I'd like to look at the most. Yes. Okay, Christian Observer. Also, An Unholy Alliance was a two-part series by Lee Sylvester of RaptureReady.com. All right, here's our National Council of Churches article. Another organization that I didn't mention was Walter Rauschenbach's the Brotherhood of the Kingdom. All right, nice picture, guys. This is long, the article is, but if you want to know what the National Council on Churches and the Federal Council on Churches are all about, here you go. And here's a quote from Dr. R.J. Rushdoony on Reformed Theology. The beginning of true liberty is Jesus Christ, and therefore the first and last target of all subversion is biblical faith. Hence, it is that the church has been the first target of infiltration and subversion, and is the most subverted institution in the United States today. So, our apostasy doesn't necessarily lie within the hearts of the believers, although it is possible, there are many of us who are living proof, to step outside of the organized religion in order to find God ourselves in the Bible, which is really how we're supposed to go about it. But people have the pretend church, the apostate church, gathered to themselves servants that are tickling their ears. Anyway, I won't go on and on. Picking up here in their second paragraph, claiming to speak with authority for some 42 million American Christians, the National Council of Churches of Christ, NCC, included 33 denominations representing most of the major Protestant and Orthodox churches in the United States. In addition, more than a score of denominations not actually members of the NCC have participated actively in its radical programs. And historically, the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church as a national congregation, have been one of the largest contributors. That's a church that I belong to for a number of years. And when their embracing of homosexuality in the church and even in the leadership of the churches came to pass with the federal government's passing of the legality of same-sex marriage, that became a topic within the district that I was involved with, and also it became a topic of conversation at the statewide level. In fact, there were a couple of churches in our conference that wanted to bow out of the conference because of the liberal stance that the United Methodist Church took. And here it gives a little bit of information about them, headquartered at Riverside Drive, New York City, and they have offices in D.C. and may have been actually officed in the District of Columbia at some point. The National Council functions through dozens of interlocking departments grouped under 4 major divisions overseeing the National Council's international operation. The program is such magnitude. Now this is from 1968, so this is what, 50 years ago. In 68, the National Council expended over $19 million on a worldwide network of leftist projects. In that year, however, they collected almost $25 million from gullible American Christians and tax-exempt leftist foundations. During the meeting of this group's General Assembly at San Diego in 68, they titled NCC Ministries and the Communist World. They revealed over $1.5 million had been given to communist government in Poland. And I'm going to cut this short here in a minute and make another segment to go along with it. But we've established some grounds, and you kind of see where I'm going with this. I'll probably break this up into a few parts because there's a lot of material that can be covered on this. The reason that I feel that it's important is the more recent count shows 38 denominations here in America. At some point in time, it was as high as 45 denominations. And the numbers over the years, from the 30s, I believe it was 32 million, and I've seen as many as 48 million, and more recently 45 million. There are 45 million, give or take, American Christians that belong to conferences that are part of the National Council on Churches, and they are contributing to the country's demise through their support of the National Council on Churches. And the National Council on Churches is also like a division of the World Council on Churches. And these folks are all about inclusivity. Here's a list of some of the member communions, and I won't go through them all. African Methodist Episcopal, American Baptist Churches in the USA, Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, Christian Methodist Episcopal, Church of the Brethren, Community of Christ, the Episcopal Church, Evangelical Lutheran Church, etc., etc. So I'm concluding this video for now, and I will be making a part 2, possibly dividing it into 3 separate parts. Thanks for your ear, and word to the wise sufficient. Remember, Jesus is the light of the world, the truth, the way, and the life, and only one way to the Father. God bless.